President Trump has just arrived for the start of what is going to be quite a remarkable parade in the American capital. Thousands of military personnel, vehicles, aircraft too, will roll through and fly above Washington, D.C. in what is quite an unusual display of American might. The parade honouring the US Army's 250th anniversary, as well as the President's 79th birthday. Let's just have a listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, in honor of America, would you please rise for the singing of our national anthem?
Stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. The ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Before we even had a country, we had an army.
They started as a small, unorganized group of shop owners and farmers, but they fought the most powerful army in the entire world to a standstill in Concord, Lexington, and Bunker Hill.
Then our Continental Congress chose George Washington as general of our Continental Army.
But it wasn't until 1 year later, on July 4th, 1776, that news arrived of the signing of our Declaration of Independence.
Now we had a new army and a new nation.
With little gunpowder, no shoes, bloody feet, few cannons, little training, and even less food.
Valley Forge started in December. They went into winter camp in December of 1777. Approximately 2,000 Americans died that winter of disease.
They lived through hell, but they never ever gave up. Not this army, not this first American army.
Finally, Washington and his army arrived here at Yorktown, where they had General Cornwallis and his powerful British army trapped in this city against the sea.
All of the preparation that Washington has learned through the course of those 6.5 years meets its full force here at Yorktown, and he employs it brilliantly.
Sailing from the Caribbean, the French Navy arrived and took on the British fleet.
Washington decided to make his move. Our men began digging to get closer and closer to the fort, finally getting within rifle and cannon range. Naturally, George Washington chose to set off our first cannon shot.
The British had two small forts in front of the main fort. They were called Redoubts 9 and 10.
Then, on the moonless night of October 14th, the American and French forces attacked the redoubts. The hand-to-hand combat with bayonets, knives, and fists was bloody, to say the least. But within an hour, we were victorious.
And as the sun came up the next day, Cornwallis looked out and realized he was in serious trouble. So he prepared an all-out, desperate counterattack.
It didn't work, and the British were forced to surrender.
We were supposed to lose to the best army and the largest and most professional navy in the world.
But our young army had won the war and our freedom, the freedom we hold so dear. And 250 years later, for what started as a ragtag group of shop owners, has now become the most powerful army in the world.
Today, many things are very different from that army here at Yorktown, but one thing remains the same. An undying passion, guts, and love for our country remains deep in the heart of today's army. When I look into their faces, you can see it. That will never change. God bless the United States Army, and God bless the United States of America.
So the parade, well underway in Washington, D.C., actually brought forward by 20 minutes or so because the weather forecast is not great. Storms and rain have been forecast, so they've brought the proceedings forward. The US Army's brought nearly 7,000 troops into Washington, along with 150 vehicles, including more than 25 M1 Abrams tanks, 28 Stryker armoured vehicles, 4 Palladian self-propelled artillery vehicles as well. There's going to be a flyover, including Apache and Black Hawk helicopters, Chinooks as well, older aircraft like the World War II era B-25 bomber and the P-51 Mustang will also all take part in that parade. But the President's hopes for a day of celebration have been punctuated by violence. National Guard troops and US Marines, of course, on guard in Los Angeles, having been ordered there by Donald Trump to secure the city amid protests over his immigration policies. Well, watching all this from Washington, D.C. is our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And it's that mix of celebration and concern, which, as you said a bit earlier, is making today's proceedings a little awkward.
Well, for some it is. I think it is the context in which this parade has ended up happening. If you look at it in its most simple form, it is a celebration of what America would say is the greatest army in the world. The 250th birthday of the army, formed, of course, as the Continental Army before the Declaration of Independence, a year before the Declaration of Independence. It was that Continental Army that marched on Washington against the British Army, then the most powerful in the world. And a year later, the United States of America was born. So in its very simplest form, that is what this is about. But of course, context is everything, and the juxtaposition of what we are seeing now under the presidency of a very particular president, for many hundreds of thousands who are marching across America, in cities across America at the moment, it is more than just uncomfortable. The protests across America are dubbed No Kings. They believe that Donald Trump sees himself, if not as a king, then as some sort of emperor. And it is, by chance, his 79th birthday today. So I suppose the question riling America right now is this a birthday celebration for the military or for the army? Or is it a celebration for this most consequential and particular president? Perhaps it is both. I'm fascinated, Jonathan, to see how Donald Trump frames the moment when he speaks a little later on. It will be, incidentally, the first time we've heard from the US president since the extraordinary events have unfolded across the Middle East. And, you know, we talk about split screen moments. There is one split screen, which is the Marines that are currently deployed in California, and the National Guard too, on American streets to quell American protests. But there is another split screen, and it is unfolding right now, because in the Middle East, both in Tehran and other cities across Iran, and in cities across Israel, there are bombs dropping at the same moment that Donald Trump is holding this celebration. So that feels awkward, certainly. But right now, the focus here for that man there is the celebration of the 250th year of the U.S. Army. Let's listen in.
Ladies and gentlemen, celebrating 250 years, your United States Army parachute team, the Golden Knights. Descending at over 120 miles an hour, the Golden Knights are using flexible wing gliders to maintain their formation. They open their main canopy simultaneously and negotiate the softest possible landing. I'll tell you, they can't hear you, but they sure can see you. You can give them a great big wave, ladies and gentlemen, the Golden Knights, the finest parachuting team in the world.
Well, this is certainly quite the spectacle. I'm seeing what you're seeing. I'm standing on the mall halfway between the Lincoln Memorial, right underneath in the shadow of the Washington Monument. And goodness me, the view that those parachutists must be having from their position as they land on the ellipse just in front of the south lawn of the White House. Quite the spectacle for the crowds that have gathered here, Jonathan. 200,000 was what was expected in the run-up to this event. We're told that the number is substantially less than that at the moment. I guess that is partly due to the weather. There are due to be some significant thunderstorms later on this evening. This event was due to kick off at 6:30. It's just gone 6:20, so it started half an hour early. The thunderstorms have meant that the fighter jets that were due to fly low over Washington a few moments ago, that part of the event has been cancelled. But the president had made quite clear over the course of the day that he wasn't going to let rain cancel this birthday celebration, and so the show is going on.
As they march by, a soldier's uniform signals their duty.
And as you say, Mark, a celebration of what's been described as the greatest army in the world, 250 years old, and the parade tracing that history right from the beginning to the current day.
Yeah, and there will be reflections of the US Army's biggest moments over those 250 years, from the very beginning. From their beginning as the Continental Army defeating the British, right the way through to the present day. Punctuation points, not just for the army, but for the country. The wars, Vietnam, the Korean War, and many others as well, more recent conflicts too.
And Mark, the logistics have been quite something. Concern that some of the tanks are so heavy they might not be able to cope with Washington's highways.
Well, they won't be able to cope with them, Jonathan, which has, again, caused some controversy. These M1 Abrams tanks weigh a huge amount, and on any street that they drive over, they pull up the tarmac as they drive. And so, as a result, concrete at every point at which they turn, because that's the point where the tracks cause damage to the road, at every point where they turn, there have been some metal sheeting has been placed on the roads to protect them as best they can. But it's one of the issues. These 60-ton tanks clearly causing some concern for the people who look after the streets here. But more broadly, it is the cost of this that is causing some concern. $45 million is the number being estimated, the cost of this event. Some saying that could be spent on veterans, it could be spent on improving the military, but against that, there are those that argue that this sort of event is a really, really important recruitment tool for the military. Around about over the course of the afternoon, there have been a kind of carnival atmosphere as military hardware has been parked up here on the mall, and families have been down to climb in the tanks, climb in the helicopters, have a look around. This sort of event, you know, the world over, when a country gets its military out, it does tend to have a positive impact on recruitment, and you know, the feel-good factor for Donald Trump. That's what it's all about. I see they're advertising defence contractors there as well. Lockheed Martin. There is a commerce side to this too.
And it comes, Mark, as protests are taking place around the country, protests about immigration policy following on from what we've seen in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's interesting. The protests have morphed a bit. I mean, the core protest that sparked 10 days or so ago now was specifically around immigration and around the methods that Donald Trump's administration has been using to round up illegals, as they refer to them as illegal aliens, without due process. There are no court proceedings for the people who are rounded up. If they are deemed to be illegal, they've been rounded up, sent to detention centres and eventually deported. For the left of politics here, that has caused significant unease and has prompted some widespread protests around some of those detention centres, largely in Los Angeles. That prompted Donald Trump to make a very controversial move to federalize the National Guard, not part of the US Army. The National Guard is distinct. Each state has one, but Donald Trump made the decision that the Democratic governor of California, Gavin Newsom, wasn't doing his job properly, and so he federalized the National Guard from California, sent them in, which provides one of the awkward bits of context of what we're seeing unfold today. But, you know, you ask about the protests, that they've morphed somewhat. Today's protests, and there are protests taking place in thousands of cities and towns across this country, some large, some much smaller. They're broader against the Trump administration more generally. No kings is the sort of catchphrase around those protests, spurred on by a belief that Donald Trump has authoritarian tendencies. And I guess this moment that we're seeing now, a military parade of a type in the US Capitol that hasn't been seen ever before, that kind of feeds into those who believe that Donald Trump is somehow becoming some sort of an authoritarian leader. I had quite a heated moment earlier on today, just as we were filming, Jonathan, down on the mall around the tanks that are being shown here. A guy heard me doing a pre-recorded piece, and I was referring to the point that some people think he's an authoritarian leader, or certainly becoming that. And the guy just went at me and said, he is not an authoritarian leader. Absolutely not. He is our proud leader. He is the democratically elected leader of this country. And I really got the sense of the divide here, and a divide that is kind of summed up by this moment. You know, there are so many people here who are here because they would see themselves as American patriots, celebrating their army, or perhaps their president's birthday as well. And then around the country, so many others who feel that this event is somewhat unpalatable. It's just not very American to be so showy-offy in the way that this they believe is.
Well, as the parade continues, Mark, let's just listen in to the military band and get a flavour of the atmosphere there in D.C.
Cleanup efforts following Hurricane Sandy, distribution support during COVID-19, and recently, support for New York State Corrections. Commanded by Chief Warrant Officer 2 Ethan Wagner and led by Drum Major Sergeant First Class Drew Gans, the band is performing Over There, written in 1917 by Broadway composer and recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal George M. Cohan. Representing the World War I era is the 82nd Airborne Division, based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You'll notice the unit is wearing replica World War I uniforms signifying the soldiers who served our nation during this time. When the Americans entered the Great War, our soldiers under the command of General Blackjack Pershing hit the trenches in the new standard. It was the olive drab winter service uniform. Now on their heads you'll see a steel helmet with sand-textured paint built to deflect deadly shrapnel from above. Not bulletproof, but battle tough. Nicknamed the Pershing boot, on their feet was the M918, 1918 French boot. It was designed to survive the brutal grind of trench warfare. And on their backs, the field pack, rations, ammo, first aid, and a gas mask. Everything a doughboy needed to fight and to win. Incidentally, the 42nd Infantry Division was deployed to heavy combat abroad and then deployed again in World War II, ultimately liberating the Dachau concentration camp. The 42nd responded to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Later, with the war on terrorism, the rainbow stretched across the world again, deploying in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thundering into view, the pride of Fort Sill, the U.S. Army Artillery Half Section. This is literally powered by horsepower and heritage. This elite ceremonial unit honors the legacy of the Army's horse-drawn artillery. With precision, discipline, and 6 majestic horses pulling a vintage 1918 caisson, the half section keeps tradition alive and rolling strong. Representing the power, pride, and precision of America's field artillery, this is Fort Sill's finest, ladies and gentlemen. Special thanks to our sponsor, Form Energy. World War II, a global fight for freedom. In history's darkest hour, the United States Army was on the front lines. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, the greatest generation faced down tyranny and turned the tide. From bombers to fighters to transports, U.S. Army aircraft started to thunder across the skies in World War II. And take a look up there, ladies and gentlemen. Flying overhead right now. They are fast, they are fierce, and famously used in the Doolittle raid over Tokyo. Leading up front, the mighty B-25 Mitchell. Up next, the Cadillac of the sky, the P-51 Mustang. From the sky, we're back down on the ground. In World War II, one vehicle led the charge, the legendary quarter-ton 4x4 command recon vehicle, the Jeep. You might have a Jeep in your driveway, but not like this. The U.S. Army truck quarter-ton 4x4 command reconnaissance, better known as the Jeep, was an iconic vehicle of World War II and was the world's first mass-produced four-wheel drive vehicle. The Army used the Jeep for almost every military activity, including command vehicles, scout cars, and medical ambulances. Fast, rugged, the Jeep became a symbol of American ingenuity. From Fort Bragg, North Carolina, this is the 82nd Airborne Ceremonial Band. The 82nd received the nickname All-Americans after a contest as it represented the diverse origins of its members from every state. This name remains today symbolized by their iconic AA patch. Fort Bragg's finest, ladies and gentlemen. Give them a big round of applause, the 82nd Airborne Ceremonial Band. In a global fight like World War II, the U.S. Army knew our troops needed more than courage. They needed innovation. Uniforms evolved for every environment, but olive drab remained the mark of the American soldier. Shaped by lessons from the trenches of World War I, the Army introduced two battlefield essentials: the M1 helmet, tough, stable, and built to protect under fire, and the M1 Garand rifle, powerful and fast. It gave American troops a very clear edge. General George S. Patton called the M1 rifle the greatest battle implement ever designed, and history proved him right. The 82nd Airborne Division. The unit is best known for their bravery on D-Day, when 12,000 parachute and glider troops destroyed German supply lines after fighting for 33 days straight. The 101st Airborne Division, based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, traces its lineage back to 1918 when it first established as the 101st Division. Known for their ability to rapidly deploy across the world, the unit has held a crucial role in operations since its inception. From parachuting behind enemy lines on D-Day to leading helicopter assaults in Vietnam, the 101st redefined modern warfare. In the 50s, the Screaming Eagles stood tall at home, protecting the Little Rock Nine during the fight for civil rights. In recent decades, they've been sent across the world with stints as far as the Middle East, where they took part in Operation Desert Storm and participated extensively in the war on terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Screaming Eagles continue to lead the way as tomorrow's division in today's Army.
You're watching Sky News and live coverage of a military parade well underway now in Washington, D.C. 7,000 soldiers, 150 vehicles, including more than 25 tanks, 28 armored vehicles, aircraft as well, Apache and Black Hawk helicopters, Chinooks 2, older aircraft like the World War II era B-25 bomber, all taking part in this, well, it has to be said, unusual display of American might. The parade honouring the US Army's 250th anniversary, as well as the president's 79th birthday. But Donald Trump's hopes for a day of celebration have been punctuated by violence and protest. And also the weather hasn't helped. In fact, very wet and windy in Washington, D.C. So they have brought this parade forward by 20 minutes or so. Well, I'm joined by Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and host of the Disorder podcast, Jason Pack, who's been watching events with me. And it's rather surreal to see this event taking place on the streets of Washington, D.C.
Well, it's quite un-American in many ways. Yes, of course, we have July 4th, which we celebrate, but we don't have a tradition of military parades. And there is a way in which this is seen by the American population as anti-American, hence the No King Day protests that are happening, not so much in D.C., but in Chicago, in L.A., and in New York, out of the idea that, you know, we rebelled against the British, lovely as they might have been, to not have these set pieces, cult of personality, jingoistic parades.
It's not universal, though, is it, that people are anti this? I mean, we know that thousands have turned out to enjoy the spectacle, to watch the spectacle. Is it a mixed response, do you think?
I think that many people who will have had family in the services are going to be quite happy to commemorate the service of their loved one, and that's a natural thing. However, the idea that this is held on the Donald's birthday politicizes the event, and then just that we don't have really a tradition of commemorating the birthday of the Army with a military parade. There was a parade in 1991, and it's important to point that out. So there is an antecedent here. That was at the end of the Soviet Union and the success in the first Gulf War. And it wasn't in this set-piece tradition that might strike the viewers quite akin to what happens in Russia every year when they harken back to ancestral glory in the great patriotic war of defeating Nazism. And that's a way of coalescing nationalism. We haven't traditionally used parades to coalesce nationalism.
Yeah, it's a very unusual situation from that point of view, and also potentially quite awkward, given the fact that it was only a few days ago President Trump ordered the National Guard and the Marines into Los Angeles. And not only that, but we've seen tonight yet more rockets raining down on Israel.
It's quite the split screen, because more Marines are fighting American citizens in L.A., where we're not supposed to be using the armed forces, certainly not the Marines, against our own citizens, than are in Syria or Iraq or Jordan defending our ally Israel or defending U.S. national interests there. Because Trump claims to be a peacemaker, and he may have done some things that are quite genius, and I like to call balls and strikes, right? However, as a peacemaker, the split screen of a rather jingoistic military parade and the use of the National Guards and the Marines against largely peaceful, not completely peaceful, but largely peaceful protests in L.A., I think the American people are able to see through this, because we have seen his poll numbers, which were hurt by the tariffs and hurt by the economy, come back in May, but really crater over the last week. So I think that that's interesting, that it's not like this display is particularly popular among people who are Republicans, but say not MAGA, or independents.
Yeah, very interesting, that point. And you mentioned earlier about other countries holding similar parades, and we know that this is something Donald Trump has wanted to do for a long time, isn't it? He saw a parade, I think, in France, the Bastille Day commemoration.
In 2017.
Yeah, and that sort of prompted him to think maybe we could do something similar.
Yeah, so on my Disorder podcast, I write and talk about what I call neopopulism. And this is a new kind of ideology. In other words, it's not right-wing in a traditional sense. It's not conservative, but it seeks to use democratic institutions and have other features such as a cult of personality or promoting disorder to stay in power. And I think when he was at that parade, he's like, oh, there's a reason the Russians and the North Koreans have this. The French have this interesting Bastille Day tradition. I could use this as a cult of personality. I could use this to force people to make loyalty oaths. And what we saw a lot in the years that he was in the wilderness, so when Biden was president, I will only surround myself with people who say that the 2020 election was stolen, or I'll only surround myself with people who say that January 6th was not an insurrection. And those things were not necessary for him to be elected, but they're ways of determining patriotism and loyalty. And having a parade and seeing which Republican lawmakers say, fine, spend the $45 million for it, and which ones who say, well, boss, I love everything that you're doing, but actually we're Americans, we don't actually do set-piece military parades. And it's interesting to see how that neo-populism works.
Jason, as you're talking, we're watching the flyover of various helicopters, Apaches, Black Hawk helicopters. Chinook's going to be part of the display as well. Our US correspondent Mark Stone is watching in Washington. The weather hasn't been great, Mark, but the choppers have been able to fly.
The choppers have been able to fly. The aircraft, the old aircraft, they flew, but the fighter jets, the modern fighter jets, we're told are not flying. But that was quite a display just now. Apache gunship helicopters, and I think they were Hueys at the front, synonymous with the Vietnam War, of course. One of so many wars that are being remembered over the course of this hour-long celebration of the US Army's 250th birthday. You mentioned other parades in other countries. You're right, it was back in 2017 that Donald Trump saw the Bastille celebrations and he was like, hang on a minute, why don't we have this? And fast forward a few years and he has got what he asked for. Although I was lucky enough a few years ago to be in Pyongyang, North Korea, to witness their military parade, and I have to say, if some think Donald Trump is a dictator, well, real dictators do this rather better, because the Pyongyang celebration was something else, something I will never forget. Goose-stepping soldiers marching in such large numbers that the ground beneath us was literally shaking. It was quite an extraordinary thing to witness. This is somewhat different, somewhat more muted, but it's certainly unusual to have a parade like this in the American capital. And as you were just discussing, for some, it feels un-American to be celebrating in this way. Interestingly, the polling, as you might imagine, has been done across America to see what people think of this. And an Associated Press poll carried out this weekend found that 60% of Americans believe the parade is not a worthwhile use of public funds. And among those polled, 78% who expressed no strong opinion about the parade itself still disapproved of the expense. $45 million is the estimated cost of all of this. But against the criticism is the view that actually what this does is to celebrate America, to celebrate a core institution of the kind of fabric of America, that is the US Army, but also to do some good for recruitment. Donald Trump claims that recruitment numbers since he took office have soared. Actually, the truth is that in the final days of the Biden administration, recruitment numbers were kind of on the rise after a low during COVID, but they have continued to rise during Donald Trump's presidency, and events like this certainly help with recruitment.
And Mark, talk to me about the crowds in Washington who've come out to watch this. There was talk that hundreds of thousands would line the streets to watch the parade. Has that materialised? Has the rain kept people away, or has that anti-American sentiment that you spoke of kept them from turning up?
Well, as you can see from the shot we're giving you now, this is our position up under the shadow of the Washington Monument. You can see that there are a lot of people here. There's no question about that, but not nearly as many as they expected. The estimate for how many people they thought would turn up was 200,000. it's hard to tell from what we're looking at here, but what we're told by the people, by the organisers, is that the numbers are far less than 200,000 that have actually turned up. Why? I don't know. I mean, it is due to rain very, very heavily later on this evening. I imagine that will have kept some people away. But there is clearly some unease about the context in which this parade is being held. And actually the context has kind of changed over the course of the week. You know, take it out of the current context and it could just be seen for what it is at its most basic, which is a celebration of the US Army. But you add to that the fact that, what was it, 10 days ago, Donald Trump made a very, very controversial decision to federalize the National Guard in California and send them and active service Marines onto the streets to help protect federal buildings against protesters who were very uneasy about Donald Trump's immigration policies. So that is one bit of context. And I guess the other thing, which is just unfolding over the past 36 hours, is what's unfolding in the Middle East. The split screen at the moment between here, Washington, and either Israeli cities, which are being bombed right now by Iranian missiles, or indeed Iranian cities and Iranian military facilities that are also being bombed by Israeli missiles. That is an awkward split screen. And what I'm wondering certainly, is whether Donald Trump will reflect any of that when he speaks a little later on from the podium at that stand that has been built in front of the White House. It will be his first comments on the unfolding events in the Middle East since they began. There were a couple of Truth Social posts that he made, kind of slightly unclear what his view was on what was unfolding in the Middle East from the content of those two posts. We haven't heard from him in any detail, so I'm interested to see whether when he takes to that podium there behind the presidential crest, whether he will address the events in the Middle East.
Yeah, what we do know, Mark, is that he has had a phone call with President Putin today.
I've been really struck at the number of phone calls, leader-to-leader phone calls that have taken place in a sort of flurry over the course of the past 24 hours or so as events have unfolded and looked to get much, much more serious in the Middle East. And yes, one of those phone calls was today between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin wished Donald Trump a happy birthday. We're told that they didn't discuss Ukraine very much at all, but in the 50-minute phone call, much of it was taken up with discussion of the Middle East. Of course, Russia is closely aligned with Iran and has condemned what Israel is doing in Iran. It is Iranian weapons that are being sent in large numbers to Russia to be used in its war against Ukraine. So we don't know the detail of that conversation, but the two leaders, they both spoke today.
The president clapping as the tanks go past. These tanks have been quite controversial, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. These are not the really heavy ones, I don't think, but the really heavy ones will come. They're the M1 Abrams that will come a little later on, and they are very, very heavy indeed. They are so heavy, in fact, 60 tons each of them, that when they turn the corners, they dig up the tarmac. And so the authorities here have placed metal sheeting at the corners at each end of the road that you can see there to prevent serious damage to the roads. But it's certainly one of many controversies for those for whom this doesn't appeal at all.
Well, if you are just joining us, we are watching the parade to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the US Army. The parade so far has featured period uniforms from the Army's history, covered wagons, vintage cars, brass bands, tanks as well. The US Army established on June the 14th, 1775, more than a year before the Declaration of Independence. George Washington was commissioned as its first commander-in-chief on June the 19th. The Army, the largest branch, of course, of the US military. About 450,000 active service members. with me watching the events unfold, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, host of the Disorder podcast, Jason Pack. Jason, it was interesting hearing what our US correspondent Mark Stone had to say about Donald Trump not having given us much in terms of the situation in the Middle East over the last 36 hours. We know he's spoken with various leaders, including President Putin. We've discussed that. He does have a moment today where he will address the public, watching on television, of course, in the crowds there. He's going to have to mention the situation as well. What are you expecting to hear from him?
It's really impossible to say. Many feel that he's played things quite well. He kept the secrecy of the Israeli attack so that it was able to, surprise the Iranian leadership and lead to the, essentially, decapitation of the IRCG command. And he used the negotiations with Witkoff scheduled for tomorrow to lull them into a false sense of security. But then on the other hand, he talks to President Putin and he says, President Putin and I agree on the need for restraint, which is a very paradoxical way of couching his desire to mediate. So I think that Trump is playing a double or a triple game, and maybe he's actually doing that quite sophisticatedly. So his remarks about events in the Middle East are likely to be more popular than his remarks about what's happening in LA. And I think it's always critical to point out to European audiences, most Americans are not that concerned with foreign policy. So you and I are aghast at the tragedy unfolding in the Middle East. Is it going to be World War III? Is it going to lead to massive civilian casualties? I think in America, the markets have barely moved, and people are worried about the No Kings protest and the fact that state senators in Minnesota were assassinated in their homes earlier today.
Shocking.
And a senator was arrested. The idea of a sitting U.S. senator being arrested, those are the things that are capturing an American audience, the fear of the loss of our civil liberties. And this display of, I agree, not dictatorship, but neopopulism or wannabe authoritarianism is what's going to hold people's audiences, not events in the Middle East which seem farther away to them.
Yeah, Donald Trump describing those awful shootings as absolutely terrible a little earlier on this evening. You say Americans aren't necessarily focusing on what is happening in the Middle East, but of course Donald Trump did, up to the election, talk about wanting no war, wanting to not have an interventionist policy, wanting to shy away from conflict, didn't he? And there is a danger that he will lose his part of his base when it comes to US policy in the Middle East.
That's right. The MAGA movement has multiple wings. It's not the traditional Republican neocon perspective, which is arguably from Vietnam onward more favorable to American hegemonic power in pursuit of American interests abroad. He ties into a more isolationist, post-Woodrow Wilson Republican Party. He loves referring back to those days. And yes, he didn't make peace in 24 hours as promised between Russia and Ukraine. And what do you know? He's not exactly going to be bringing the Iranians to the table to be, concluding the deal of the century in terms of them giving up their nuclear centrifuges. However, he can say, I did good cop, bad cop. I use Witkoff in this way. And look, we achieved something that makes the world safer. So I think it is important to point out a slight difference between how European electorates are going to view events in the Middle East and an American electorate. The American electorate, for the most part, Democrat and Republican, will see these developments of, wow, the Israelis did something which is technologically brilliant, like they had done with the Hezbollah pager attack in Lebanon, but they've done it in Iran, and Trump allowed that, and Biden wouldn't have, and therefore Trump is a stronger and more muscular president. So that split screen, I think, actually plays favorably to him with this military parade, even though I think it points out the hypocrisy, which is that he claims to be a peacemaker and he's nothing of the sort.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, there was a sense, wasn't there, when Israel launched these missiles initially, that Donald Trump was hinting that perhaps this could put extra pressure on Iran to come back to the table, maybe give more concessions. What was that all about? That's sort of fanciful, isn't it, that would happen?
It's not only fanciful, but he knows that that's not going to happen. Everything about Shia religion and the Iranian obsession with martyrdom, they need to react now. And we're seeing every ballistic missile that they have, they're firing and at population centers, quite different than the October 2024 attack, where they retaliated, but they didn't hit major population centers, right? However, by doing that, he can say, oh, I don't have anything to do with this. I want there to be restraint. I'm pursuing the negotiations. As I say, I like to call balls and strikes. I'm no fan of Trump. I moved to the UK and pursuing nationality here to avoid what I see as this descent to neopopulism and wannabe authoritarianism in my homeland. But I have to give it to him. They have played some things quite brilliantly in, not associating themselves with the Israeli attacks so that American personnel probably can't be targeted in embassies in the Middle East or military bases in Iraq, while then saying I have nothing to do with it, but then behind the scenes misleading the Iranians. There are some things that by playing things not by the book, he is able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, it sounds as if you don't believe Iran will target US bases at the moment then, given the way things are?
It's quite dangerous for them to do so because the Israelis don't have bunker-busting bombs, right? So they have hit nuclear facilities in Natanz because those are not as buried as the ones in Fordow and around Isfahan. And if, let's say, the Iranians are like, not enough of our ballistics are getting through and only 3 people died south of Tel Aviv, we need to hit some American bases in the Gulf countries. Those they can hit because they're close enough to Iran that there's not enough time to intercept those missiles. But then America is a party to the war, and the Americans would then just give the Israelis these bunker busters, and they would hit Fordow, and then the Iranian nuclear program is over, right? There's an extent to which it would be a huge mistake. The Iranians frequently do non-rational things, right? And I don't put it past them. I think there could be a degree of frustration which would lead to that, but then the retaliation would be so overwhelming it could lead to the end of the Islamic Republic, right? So that is a degree of escalation which it seems more things would have to unfold. Anything can happen. This is going to be going on for 2 or 3 weeks. This is a war. It's a live, hot war. It's different than the tit-for-tat missile exchanges that we saw, for example, in October 2024. But I would be surprised if it was their first move because it represents such an escalation. Yeah. OK, interesting to get your thoughts and analysis. Thank you very much for the moment, Jason. Let's return to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is watching events in Washington, D.C. He's amongst the crowds there. How's it going down with everybody, Mark?
Well, let's find out, Jonathan. I just spoke to a couple of people earlier. They said they're happy to talk to us. Hi, guys. How are you? What's your name?
Scott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Scott. Nice to meet you. Just wondering what you make of all this.
We're enjoying it. We were just up in Washington, D.C., just happening to visit, and we heard about it, and we stopped by. And so far, so good. We don't have the best seats in the place. It's kind of far off, but it's a pretty fun time.
Yeah, it's quite unusual for America to have an event like this.
Yeah, what was the last one with Desert Storm with the first Bush? And yeah, it's been years. But, it's good for the people in the Army, to kind of celebrate them and stuff.
What about the controversy? People saying this is Donald Trump wanting to celebrate his birthday.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's just coincidence that it falls, happens to fall right on his birthday. I'll take it at face value and say it's the 250th anniversary. And his birthday at the same time just happens to fall on the same day,
there are protests across the country. They've kind of morphed from being protests about immigration and the Trump immigration policies more into these sort of no kings protests. People believe that this is just a reflection of a guy who is a sort of wannabe dictator.
Yeah, the country's pretty divided right now. You have you have people on the left and right, and they're both really committed to their side. I don't think I've ever seen it at the point where they're, at each other's throats so much. Sometimes it's like, I try to get along with people as much as I can, but it comes up in, everyday conversations. Families have, got split apart because of it. It's unfortunate. But that's what happens in countries sometimes, I guess. Hopefully it doesn't escalate anymore, you know what I mean? Hopefully things start to calm down rather than, get more hyped up.
What do you think? You enjoying it?
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I want to work in international politics someday, so what he said, I'm kind of curious on what this will have with our international relations with other countries. The only two Western countries that I can remember kind of having parades like this are the UK and France, so it's kind of neat to see how this is, reflecting on our how we want to be viewed in the world, especially with, kind of current events like the war in Iran, which started yesterday.
All right. Well, thank you both for talking to us. Enjoy the evening.
Have a good one.
Well, a reference there, Jonathan, to another country which actually does have a king and did have a military parade today, and that, of course, is our own.
Yeah, very good point. Trooping the colour, of course, under much better conditions, I have to say, than where you are at the moment. When are we expecting to hear from Donald Trump? You said he's going to address the crowds a little bit later. What are the timings?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually don't know because the timings have been thrown out completely. They've cancelled elements of it. The aerial elements, the fast jets have been cancelled. They've moved the whole thing forward. The rain is beginning to start now. These are the really big tanks. Some of the guns that you can see there being towed by the iconic Humvee that really does reflect the US military. It's synonymous to the US military operations right around the world. The Humvee Jeep that you see all over the world there. And the M1 Abrams tanks as well. These are the ones that are very heavy vehicles that have been causing some concern about digging up the roads. I can't see too much damage on the roads at the moment. MAGA hats as well in the crowd. The crowd here is very much supportive of Donald Trump. There's no doubt about that.
OK, Mark, sorry, we're just losing your audio there. You're just breaking up a little bit. So we'll let you reconnect and we'll come back to you a little bit later. If you have just joined us, you're watching Sky News. Just gone midnight here in the UK, 7 o'clock in the evening in Washington. The grand military parade that President Trump has been wanting to hold for years has begun, barreling down Constitution Avenue with tanks, troops, a 21-gun salute as well. Let's have a listen in.
The global war on terrorism saw the introduction of a range of new technologies on the battlefield. The 8-wheeled Stryker armored combat vehicle is the first new military vehicle to enter service in the U.S. Army since the Abrams tank back in the 1980s. The vehicle was developed to fill a gap in the Army's inventory between a lighter infantry and heavy armored unit. The Stryker armored combat vehicle enables the team to maneuver in close and urban terrain, plus provide protection in open terrain and transport infantry quickly to critical battlefield positions. The first Stryker vehicles were fielded back in 2002 with the 1st Stryker Brigade combat team deploying to Iraq in 2003. U.S. Army Rangers, predating the Revolutionary War, fought in the War of 1812 as part of the regular army and patrolled the frontier from Ohio to western Illinois on horseback and by boat, with the likes of Daniel Boone and Abraham Lincoln in their ranks. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Rangers were called upon to lead the way in the global war on terrorism. As part of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, the 75th Ranger Regiment, based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, represents a lethal, agile, and flexible force capable of conducting many complex joint special operations missions. Today's Rangers Regiment is the Army's premier direct action raid force. It is always combat ready, mentally and physically tough, and the U.S. Army Special Operations Command is an elite group of individuals trained to lead and succeed in protecting the country from their threats. Composed of 5 units with unique specialties, Special Operations works in small tactical teams, taking on the most challenging and sensitive missions. Military legends to service members and civilians alike, they take on terrorists through quiet guerrilla war-style missions in foreign countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Army's Special Forces. The Stryker Brigade Combat Team combines the capacity for rapid deployment with survivability and tactical mobility. Adaptability and continuous transformation to overcome our enemies is vital. Fighting an elusive enemy in distant places and at home requires new tools such as unmanned aerial vehicles for surveillance and the Blue Force Tracker to see real-time details of troop movements. The United States does not face the challenging international environment alone. Our network of allies and partners is an advantage that our adversaries can never hope to match. Over 80 nations have fought alongside the United States or assisted enduring the global war on terrorism. The 10th Mountain Division's climb to glory began with its establishment as the 10th Light Division in July 1943, the only one of its size in the U.S. military to receive specialized training for fighting in mountainous conditions. After periods spent inactive as a training division and as a standard infantry division, the unit returned to its roots in 1985 when it regained its Mountain Division designation. In the 1990s, the division participated in numerous humanitarian and peacekeeping operations. During the war on terrorism, the 10th Mountain Division proved their mettle as light fighters through repeated deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, since 2002, the 10th Mountain Division, based out of Fort Drum, New York, has been the most deployed regular Army unit. Its combat brigades have seen over 20 deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. To show America's military might, they have one purpose: to deter war and, if ordered, defeat the enemies of the United States of America. They are the 10th Mountain Division. Investments in cutting-edge systems, drone technology, and abilities strengthen the force, equipping soldiers with tools they need to protect the country and defend democracy. The Army has 8 Stryker Brigade combat teams, 6 in the active component and 2 in the National Guard. More than 2/3 of the 7,000 servicemen and women who sacrificed their lives fighting the global war on terrorism were part of one of the Army's 3 branches: active duty forces, the Army Reserve, and the Army National Guard. The Army is continuously transforming to deter aggression to ensure our adversaries...
You're watching the huge military parade taking place right now in Washington, D.C., commemorating the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army, which coincides, of course, with President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. The event expected to include around 6,500 soldiers 50 helicopters, those 60-ton M1 Abrams battle tanks, and many tens of thousands of people lining the street there to watch the parade go by. With me in the studio, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, host of the Disorder podcast, Jason Pack. Jason, it's remarkable watching this, something that we don't see in America. Why do you think Donald Trump was so keen to stage it?
Well, I find it cringe watching it, but I do understand his psychological motives. He is a thin-skinned neo-populist, and he's a megalomaniac, as is Putin or many authoritarians. And
that's quite strong to compare him in those terms.
For sure. I mean, that's my view. He loves being the center of attention, and I feel that he's fundamentally an insecure man who, seeing the authority, the power that he has, makes him feel better about himself. And seeing all these people salute him and he salutes them, that somehow taps into something. You know what Kamala Harris said in her very successful debate appearance? Foreign leaders understand that he loves flattery and favors. The Qataris just gave him a $400 million jet. He doesn't need a jet. The U.S. produces these jets. But he loves the idea. There's someone who wants to give me a $400 million jet as a present. And he loves that these military guys dress up in old period uniforms and are waving at him. I can't inhabit that because that's not my psychology. But I've studied enough about wannabe authoritarians and neo-populists to understand the mentality.
How's it gone down with Americans themselves? The polls suggest that actually many people don't necessarily want this, need this, and maybe even would use the word you used, cringe.
I think a lot of people are cringing. A lot of classical Republicans who do value the Army and they value America's great military tradition. Arguably, we have the greatest military tradition, having not only been victorious in World War I and World War II, as the British were, but really saving Western civilization, defeating Nazism, all the things that America can be so proud of. They would say we are not trying to show off, right? That there's something wrong about this. So you could see from a right-wing kind of classical Senator McCain, may he rest in peace perspective, this wouldn't be what Senator McCain would have wanted. However, many who are engaged in the culture war would say this is exactly what we need, because on the left, people don't value Western civilization enough. They don't value what America has done in, for example, fighting the war on terror or winning World War II. So I can understand Americans who are very happy to participate in this. I think that they may miss the history of our tradition of 250 years ago. The reason why we established this army was to overthrow the perceived tyranny of George III and to not want to do things like titles and honors and parades.
And do you think that's why opponents of the president's agenda at the very same time that this parade is going on, they're rallying in hundreds of towns and cities across America with these No Kings protests? An interesting phrase that, isn't it? No Kings.
Exactly, and it's quite relevant for a British audience, is that Americans may not know their history very well, but the one thing that they know is that we rebelled against George III because we didn't want to have a monarch, right? And the Donald is setting himself up as some kind of monarch. Oh, I might not respect the next term limit, or, rules are for the little people kind of perspective. And I think No Kings is a very powerful slogan. The Democrats have done quite a poor job, I would argue, in explaining why the tariffs are bad, or explaining why, even if tariffs are okay, this way of doing tariffs is incoherent and isn't bringing jobs back to America. But this idea of No Kings doesn't need to be explained to American audience, and it can resonate with Never Trump Republicans, independents, and Democrats equally because of our unique history. And I think it's worth pointing out that maybe 100,000 people are on the National Mall and on Constitution Avenue there. More than 1 million are in Chicago and New York and LA at these No Kings protests.
Do you think they'll have much momentum beyond today?
I can't speculate, and I would point out that there really have not been many popular protests since the inauguration of January 20. I've been surprised at how few they are. But it does seem that this No Kings movement is building momentum.
From a more practical point of view, the cost of it as well has caused quite a lot of concern and in some quarters outrage. $45 million at one estimate?
I mean, it's insane. It's not needed, but that's not a lot of money in compared to the American budget, because this is a man who eviscerated $7 trillion of American economic wealth on Liberation Day, April 2nd. So I don't think the $45 million is the issue. It's the principle.
And this coming, of course, as we look towards the Middle East and a very concerning situation there. You know, the juxtaposition is awkward.
Well, in the Middle East, he can be thought by his supporters to be defending America's ally Israel, or to be keeping the world safe by making sure that they don't get nuclear breakout capacity. But the hypocrisy of saying that he's a peacemaker and he wants to bring peace to Ukraine and Russia and Iran and Israel and Gaza and Israel while having a military parade, I think it's the contradictions, and that his personality and the need for adulation is so on display today.
OK, well, as the parade continues, let's listen in to some of the commentary.
Bayonet Division boasts a proud history of answering the call of its motto, "Trust in me," with resolute dedication. Sent to deployments and conflicts around the globe since it was founded, the division returned to Fort Lewis in 1971, its first time on American soil since 1934. The 7th Division, originally called the Hourglass Division due to their patch design, gained the nickname Bayonet Division during their deployment to Korea in June of 1950. At Incheon Landing and during the liberation of Seoul, they were credited with plunging the bayonet into the heart of the enemy, with 13 members of the division receiving the Medal of Honor. The 7th enables and sustains the combat readiness of 2 Stryker Brigade combat teams and a Combat Aviation Brigade. With the American soldier, the cornerstone of everything the Army does, we are continuously transforming. Army careers span the spectrum from attorneys to astronauts and mechanics to engineers. The Army's greatest asset is our people, the finest men and women our great nation has to offer, with a myriad of talents that make us stronger. Aside from its people, the Army's next greatest asset is its technology and equipment. Coming up next, these vehicles offer a glimpse of what the Army employs for readiness and battle. The portable howitzers and the portable Abrams tank were used extensively in the Gulf War, along with Bradley tanks and the infantry squad vehicle. The ISB provides enhanced tactical mobility of an infantry brigade combat team. This allows commanders greater freedom of movement and action. The ISB provides the warfighter with increased flexibility to ensure infantry units maintain momentum to achieve mission success. When duty calls, U.S. Army soldiers don't just answer, they lead. From Fort Bragg, witness a powerful demonstration of strength, purpose, and the unmatched capability of today's Army.
You're watching Sky News. A huge military parade taking place in Washington, D.C., celebrating the 250th anniversary of the American Army. These are live pictures on the other side of America, Los Angeles, where we know that there have been protests over a number of days now. They started off following immigration raids, Trump policy to crack down on illegal immigration. Protests began then, but now they have morphed into something else. These No Kings protests, a day of nationwide demonstrations. And these pictures from a little bit earlier this afternoon, again in Los Angeles, you can see riot police there on the streets, tear gas being fired, demonstrators being removed from the area. Clearly a great deal of tension on the streets, not just in Los Angeles, but in many cities across the United States. Police on horseback trying to control the crowds, and once again tear gas being fired at protesters. Watching events with me, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, host of the Disorder podcast, Jason Pack. Jason, these are concerning scenes, aren't they? Police firing tear gas once again.
Well, it's quite disorderly because no one knows why or where they're protesting. I think it is unfortunate that many of the protesters choose to use Mexican or Palestinian flags at these protests because it, to some extent, justifies the culture war view that there needs to be this crackdown. But as you can see, the protesters look quite peaceful. They're just standing there, a lot of press. What is the need for tear gas? It seems to be showing weakness rather than strength.
Yeah, very hard to know, isn't it, the detail of what's happening. But as you say, at the moment, things seem peaceful. A bit of a standoff between the protesters and the riot police. It was earlier that the tear gas was being fired. No Kings protests, as they're being known, taking place across the United States as that parade continues in Washington, D.C.
I'm very passionate about being a drum master. The paratroopers, they see you and, they believe in you.
The parade has been punctuated by a number of films, short films, which all reflect on the 250 years of the American military. Let's just watch.
This week we honor 250 years of valor and glory and triumph by the greatest fighting force ever to walk the face of the earth, the United States Army. For 2.5 centuries, our soldiers have marched into the raging fires of battle and obliterated America's enemies.
I love the Army. It is a great place to set yourself up for success, to prepare yourself for the future.
God bless you, God bless our soldiers, and God bless the U.S. Army.
Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson, Alaska is the home to America's Arctic Angels, who execute expeditionary operations worldwide, conduct multi-domain operations in the Indo-Pacific Theater and the Arctic, and on order decisively defeat any adversary in extreme cold weather, mountainous and high-latitude environments through large-scale combat operations. The Angels are the Army's only Arctic division. Masters of Arctic warfare, the 11th serves worldwide in all climates. Established in November of 1942, the Angels of the 11th Airborne Division led the way in the Philippines during World War II and spearheaded an amphibious invasion of Luzon and distinguished themselves during the liberation of Manila. After periods spent inactive and stationed in Germany from 1963 to 65, the division operated as the 11th Air Assault Division with the mission of testing and refining the Army's helicopter-centric air mobility doctrine. Activated once again in June of 2022, they remain dedicated to defending America's interests throughout the Arctic, in Alaska, and beyond. The 11th Airborne Division, America's Arctic Angels. Requiring ongoing maintenance in the field and on base because nothing happens until something moves, wheeled vehicle mechanics supervise and perform maintenance, repair, and recovery operations on vehicles that serve the Army in a variety of mission-critical roles. Included in the array of mobile artillery such as Paladins and the Abrams tank is the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle known as the JLTV. It's highly adaptable, providing protected and sustained mobility for personnel and payloads. The JLTV is known for its off-road capability while providing armor against small arms and improvised explosive devices. The JLTV, right there.
Sky News, we're watching a huge military parade taking place in Washington, D.C. It's been quite a spectacle. We've seen thousands of troops, tanks, military hardware in what is something you wouldn't normally see in the United States of America. You'd see it in different countries around the world, not in the US, Jason. Strange to make comparisons, really, isn't it? Because we know that Donald Trump got this idea when he saw the Bastille Day commemorations taking place in Paris. But of course, this isn't celebrating a particular moment in time.
Well, the moment in time that is being celebrated is the foundation of the U.S. Army, but 99% of Americans wouldn't have known that that happens on June 14th, nor that this is 250 years of it. It is not inherently bad or undemocratic to commemorate the glories of the Army in keeping Americans safe. What's weird is it being used to show the authority of the president in changing the traditions of our country, right? And trooping the color, because it's a British tradition, no one considers it in any way authoritarian or jingoistic. It's some 19th century technology of horses and seeing the king and the queen, and it's kind of quaint and folksy, nice day out, right? This, because it's an upending of our traditions as Americans, I think can strike someone as being quite jingoistic.
Yeah, and certainly there hasn't been a huge call in America for this to take place, has there? The polls have suggested that, in fact, the majority of people are not particularly bothered either way or the other about this event happening.
Yes, and what we're seeing is that Trump's psychology is that he wants the acclamation. He's a doer. And it seems in the way that he's handled tariffs, they're on, they're off. Look, I have a great deal. Oh, here, he came, we achieved something. But what he achieved was exactly the same 10% tariffs that they had before they did the deal. So he wants to be seen as doing stuff. And I'm not sure that there's even an end game of what is trying to be, you know, the end state of this. And I have to say, the more we watch, and it's been a pleasure to watch with you and your viewers over the last hour, I have many mixed emotions and mostly confusion. What is emerging as I'm seeing this?
Mixed emotions, mainly confusion. And of course, we know, don't we, that there have been many protests taking place in America. We were looking at live pictures a short time ago of scenes in Los Angeles. We can go back there now. Riot police on the streets there. These No Kings protests. Just explain what that is.
Sure. I think it's important for a British audience to grasp that the military parade is commemorating 250 years since the American military was established to fight the War of Independence against the British. And hence, the No Kings protest is saying, well, why did we rebel against King George III? Because he wanted to do taxation without representation. And he was perceived in America as not being democratic. So we established checks and balances. And one of those checks and balances are that governors have a certain role and that the Congress has a certain role. And Trump doesn't seem to understand the Constitution or the checks and balances. And he has federalized the National Guard in California and essentially turned California into the epicenter of the resistance. That's why we are seeing that the No Kings protest in LA is the one where the police are using tear gas, and why Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has become essentially the most popular Democrat, something like the leader of the opposition that we don't traditionally have in America.
And certainly there hasn't been that voice, has there, in the way that the American system is set up, the American political system, unlike here in the UK, of course. You have a very vocal opposition, but that isn't something that you have in America. And Gavin Newsom, some are saying, is stepping into that role.
Yes, Kamala obviously has disappeared as a public voice since her disgrace and loss. Biden, we know about his prostate cancer. I have been shocked to see how little Obama has spoken out. He's like retired. He's not even involved in these things. It's nice to see Gavin Newsom stepping into this role. He communicates well. He's very slick. And you have to keep in mind, California, if it was its own country, will be the world's 4th largest economy. It's where all these tech innovations are happening. And it's a place that has a lot of migrants and people of every ethnicity and religion. And of course, there are inefficiencies, and people say, oh, it's a democratic state, it couldn't handle the wildfires. But California creates jobs and gives more than $86 billion to the federal government each year, which largely funds red states. So I think Gavin Newsom has a lot of arguments that he can make against President Trump about what works in California and isn't working in the rest of the nation.
Interesting. We'll go to our correspondent in a moment in Washington. But just before we do, I think it's probably worth reflecting, Jason, that as well as the conflict in the Middle East, of course, today has been marred by the assassination of a Democratic lawmaker in Minnesota. Desperately sad for Americans and deeply concerning.
I have to say, I almost cried when I saw the news preparing to come on air with you here. There have been times previously when conspiracy theorists have, tried to kill people in a pizza parlor, very famously, or stab Nancy Pelosi's husband for no reason other than some conspiracy. But this was an example of a time when lawmakers were actually killed. A state representative and state senator in Minnesota were killed for no reason other than that there's a conspiracy theory that they are pro-choice and are somehow killing babies or whatever. It's some deranged mind, like a school shooting. But it's become partisan, and they went into their homes. They somehow found out where these people lived. And, Americans have access to guns much easier than in Europe. So that these kind of unhinged accidents can happen, it's very, very terrifying.
Yeah. OK, let's go to Mark Stone, our US correspondent who's in Washington. Mark, as this parade continues, we have seen protests in numerous towns and cities across America, but particularly in the last few moments, tear gas being fired in Los Angeles.
Yeah, what a split screen that is, the military parade here and then unrest on the streets on the other side of the country in Los Angeles. It is not the National Guard or the Marines that are involved in that crowd control and that tear gas. It is the state law enforcement, the police at the moment that are being used. Nevertheless, it gives you a sense of the context in which this event today in Washington is being held. There it is, literally split screen of the two live moments unfolding. The other one, of course, is the Middle East. And a few moments ago, we got a glimpse of Steve Witkoff, who is Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. He is sitting alongside the American president watching this parade here in Washington, D.C. And I spotted him checking his phone a few moments ago. He will be well aware of exactly what is going on in real time in Israel and in Iran as those two countries attack one another as goodness knows what begins to unfold in that region, which he has been trying to grip over the course of the past few months of this second Trump presidency with not very much success, it would seem right now. Jonathan, I've just been down into the crowds. We can't get a live signal down there, but we went down to talk to quite a few of the people who've come down here to gather. What really has struck me, what's really interesting, is that notwithstanding all the stuff that we've heard about this being some sort of an event that Donald Trump has hijacked or created to celebrate his own birthday, that is not the sentiment of the people that have come down here. Clearly, they are not of the view that this parade is a bad idea or they wouldn't have turned up, but they do not see it as in any way political. Those we spoke to, they see this as a celebration of the US Army, the 250th birthday of the US Army. Some talk to me about it being a patriotic moment at an uneasy time, whether it be uneasy domestically or internationally. One man brought up China. He said, we will be at war with China over the years ahead. We need patriotism, and events like this, they foster a patriotic sense. And so for him, it was really important. A serving US colonel said to me, "Nonsense, this is nothing to do with politics. This is about the army." So that seems to be the sentiment of the crowd here. We haven't heard yet from Donald Trump. We will hear from him, we think, in the moments ahead when the parade itself gets underway. That'll be an interesting moment. How does he frame this event? Does he reference his own birthday? I'm sure he will. He's Donald Trump. But how does he frame it in the wider context of what's happening in Los Angeles and in cities around the country? Protests that have morphed from being specifically about his immigration policies to being more generally against Donald Trump and the authoritarian tendencies that some people in this country see that he is displaying. How will he reference that? Will he reference that in his speech? And of course, what will he say about the Middle East? This will be the first time we've heard from Donald Trump since the events in the Middle East unfolded a couple of nights ago now. So it'll be really interesting to see his pitch, his tone when he speaks in the hour ahead.
Mark, stay with us if you would. We're just going to take viewers to Israel. We have live shots of the Tel Aviv skyline. Israel's military saying in the last few moments a new barrage of missiles from Iran is heading towards the country. And as we can see there, the Iron Dome, that defence system which protects Israel, kicking in as another wave, another barrage of missiles heads to Israel. Let's just listen in. You're watching live pictures of the skyline in Tel Aviv. Another barrage of Iranian missiles heading to Israel. The Iron Dome, those Patriot missiles of the Iron Dome shooting up into the night sky to try and intercept those ballistic missiles from Iran. The IDF earlier warning the public to stay close to shelters. You can hear the air raid sirens going off there as the two countries launched simultaneous attacks. Iran saying it was launching a variety of ballistic missiles on Israel. Israel, we know today, has expanded its bombing campaign in Iran as well, with strikes on its energy industry for the first time, while still striking sites and targets associated with its military and its nuclear capability as well. Mark Stone, our US correspondent, is still with us. He's monitoring that parade in Washington. But Mark, as you were saying, Donald Trump is due to address the public a little later, and he is going to have to bring up the situation in the Middle East.
He's going to have to. You'll have to excuse the sound here in Washington. We've got I don't know what you'd call it, a fleet of Apache gunship helicopters flying overhead right now. The juxtaposition is is honestly quite extraordinary with what you are playing, the live pictures out of Israel, and then alongside it at the same time, this celebration of U.S. military might here in Washington, D.C. No wonder Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, no wonder he was checking his phone in those images we caught of him 10 or so minutes ago. He must be being kept abreast of what's happening in Israel in real time. I imagine, to be honest with you, if Donald Trump and his team were not here watching this event, they would be 200 yards behind where they're sitting, inside the West Wing, in the Situation Room, watching what is unfolding, because it is extremely serious to see yet another barrage of Iranian missiles landing on cities across Israel. I mean, from the images you played a moment ago, it did look as though the Iron Dome was doing its job, was taking out these missiles. From the bit that we played a few moments ago, it didn't look like there were any impacts on the ground. But as you and I both know from covering and being there when these Iron Domes are operating, they have to reload in real time. And if the Iranian missiles overwhelm the system, then it will. Then their missiles will impact, as we saw last night. So a really, really serious situation on the ground. It's quite bizarre to be standing here in Washington watching this military parade unfolding as America's closest ally is being bombarded by Iranian missiles at the same time. As you say, Donald Trump due to address this. There's somewhat of an American vacuum right now, Jonathan. Policy-wise, we really don't quite know where Donald Trump stands on what has happened over the course of the past couple of days. What is his foreign policy position when it comes to this? We don't know. Perhaps we'll get some clarity on that an hour or so ahead when he speaks.
Well, Jason Pack from the Royal United Services Institute is here with me in the studio as well. Once again, Jason, concerning pictures coming out of Israel, those ballistic missiles from Iran trying to make an impact in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem as well, the Iron Dome doing its job for the moment. But of course, we know that it isn't 100% foolproof, and a number of people have been killed today. Iran's Revolutionary Guard saying in the last few moments, if Israel continues its hostilities, Iran's attacks will become heavier and more extensive. While on our screens, we're looking at the future now. It's the future section of this military parade. Who knows where the future is?
Well, it's definitely back to the future, because the wars of the past were, chaotic and Habesian, and we're seeing that in the Middle East, where the barrage against population centers, and it's not just Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Haifa in particular has suffered a lot of direct impacts in the last few hours. Those missiles are quite different than the barrage we saw in October 2024, or the ongoing Houthi attacks, and the Houthis are Iranian proxies based in Yemen. What we have seen is many more ballistic missiles able to impact and, hit civilian targets and kill and injure people in Israel. And that's because what we're witnessing in the Middle East now is actually a war, not just an operation, right? We know that there's been an Israel-Hamas war, that's well acknowledged, but for example, what has happened against Hezbollah, that was an operation, the pager operation, an occupation south of the Litani River. We now have a full war between Iran and Israel. I like to call it the commencement of the wars of the enduring disorder. But it's not going to be over in a second. It's definitely going to be going on kinetically for another week or two, but it could also escalate.
And as Mark was saying, President Trump has been uncharacteristically quiet, hasn't he, in terms of this conflict, this war, as you're calling it. Why is that, and what is his next move going to be?
I mean, it's not possible to predict Trump's moves, but many people think he can't keep a secret. He always blabs, he brags about his successes, but he kept a secret quite well that he, Netanyahu, and Witkoff were playing the Iranians. They were pretending to do this diplomacy so that it would seem that the Israelis wouldn't attack until the meeting that was scheduled for tomorrow in Oman between the Iranians and Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. But that was actually a charade to allow this attack to happen under secrecy. So it does seem that he has, as it were, outfoxed the Iranians, and that he's quite happy that the Iranians have, to his mind, less leverage now. In other words, the nuclear program, the amount of enriched uranium that they had was the leverage, and they could trade it for certain things like sanctions relief, right? That's what the Iranians want, or the regime staying in power, or other things. And in his view, and I'm not saying that this is correct, the Israelis have weakened the Iranians' leverage, and that they should, grovel and make some kind of deal before they have less leverage. I think that he's wrong, that Iranian psychology is not going to work that way, but that's how I understand his tweets.
Mark Stone, our Washington correspondent, is still with us, monitoring the parade, also monitoring the situation in the Middle East. Mark, it'd be interesting to get your view on what the American public thinks when it comes to Israel striking Iran. Are they very much focused on domestic issues right now? And we know there are many of them in America, as opposed to what is happening in the Middle East, or is it playing on people's minds?
No, I would agree with the conversation that you had earlier, where you made the point, or both of you made the point, that that in fact here, foreign wars, they do feel a long way away, and I think certainly for the people down here, well, they're certainly not aware right now what we've been playing out over the course of the past hour in Israel, because they're busy watching this. But I think it is challenges closer to home. No matter what side of the political divide they are on, it is challenges closer to home that are occupying people's minds here. And perhaps if they are concerned about challenges abroad, it is things further away, further down the line. China has come up quite a lot in conversations I've had here over the course of the afternoon. People seeing the threat from China, that other superpower, which does incidentally have big parades of the type we have seen today, much bigger in fact. I've been to a couple of the big parades in Beijing. They are a lot larger than what we have seen here in Washington today. Picking up on another point you were both making a moment ago about Donald Trump perhaps playing a diplomatic masterstroke in hiding the fact that they knew, if they did, quite a while ago, that Israel would attack Iran, to allow Israel the element of surprise. And of course, remember, in Iran, they did not expect that these attacks would come before the Sunday talks, the talks tomorrow that Steve Witkoff, who is here, was due to be holding in Oman, in Muscat, with the Iranian officials. They kept the pretense that those talks were on, which meant that the Iranians did not expect an attack to come, and yet it did, and all those Iranian commanders were not in hiding and were therefore killed. But I guess you could argue as well that there is a fine line between diplomatic masterstroke and an ineptitude of diplomacy, a very fine line. And it may well be the case that this plan, to the extent that we know there is a plan, doesn't work out. I mean, the fact that Iran is still bombarding Israel is, well, let's see how it goes. But I think Israel might have expected that in that first wave of attacks yesterday night, the night before last, was it? I'm losing track. That would have taken out so much of Iran's capability to strike Israel that they wouldn't still be getting the barrages that they're getting now. So this is a massively, massively dangerous moment for the Middle East. Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world. He holds the levers here, and whether he chooses to pull those levers and which levers he chooses to pull remains to be seen. But an absence of American leadership, one way or the other, which is what we have got at the moment, because he hasn't spoken about what's unfolding in the Middle East, that too is dangerous. I think Israel, in order to have an end game here, to bring what it has started to an end, it will need America. It will need Donald Trump's leadership. And so we await with some anticipation to see what he says tonight and what he says tomorrow and in the coming days for what is a gravely dangerous situation right now in the Middle East.
Mark, for the moment, thank you. Jason Pack from RUSI is with me in the studio. On the right of your screen, Tel Aviv. We are told that a barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles is attacking Israel, and Tel Aviv is part of that this evening. We've seen those missiles of the Iron Dome shooting up into the night sky to try and counter that attack. Jason, your thoughts?
Mark made some very important points, which is that what Netanyahu has started, only Trump can conclude. If there's going to be an off-ramp from war to diplomacy, it is the bully pulpit of the American presidency which can provide that off-ramp. I don't know if what Trump has done is a diplomatic masterstroke to catch the Iranians off guard, but he obviously did play some footsie with Witkoff and Netanyahu to allow this surprise. Does he have the ability to play the elder statesman and calm down tensions? I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. He does, though, seem to like to think of himself as a peacemaker. And you may say, oh, that's just what he says publicly. But those who know him in old circles, like I'm saying real estate circles from the 1980s in Manhattan, he's someone who opposed the Iraq War. He's someone who said, you know, Vietnam was a mistake. And that is very interesting because he loves having a military parade. So he wants to be strong and a strong man who doesn't have to use his army. I don't know what will happen next because it's impossible to say, because he's not a purely rational political actor. In other words, he loves the idea that the American stock market is going up. He loves it. If you remember the first term, he would brag about my big, bright and shiny Dow Jones Industrial. But then the tariffs that he unleashed cost $7 trillion of the stock market value to be eviscerated. We really don't know how he's going to create this off-ramp. But as Mark said, only he can do that. Netanyahu cannot.
Jason, thank you for the moment. We're also hearing Israeli military say sirens activated now in several areas following launches from Yemen and Iran as well. With regard to those protests as well, we've seen numerous protests taking place across America. They've been dubbed the No Kings protests. We're hearing more than 200,000 people joined the No Kings protest in New York. That's according to organisers. And San Diego police say 60,000 people attended two protests in downtown San Diego. All remained peaceful there, although we do know that there has been some trouble in Los Angeles a bit earlier on today. Police fired tear gas. There were mounted riot police as well, and a number of arrests. Back in Washington, D.C., President Trump is about to address the crowds. Let's listen in.
Left, pace. Mr. President, First Sergeant Norton reporting for duty, sir. Ready to commence the ceremony as directed.
I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. Congratulations. Congratulations. Welcome to the United States Army, and have a great life. Thank you very much. Have a great life. Thank you.
Ranger School is the best life insurance policy for our Army. It will always end with two people facing off with each other, and we need young leaders to be able to close with and destroy the enemy and defend our nation's interests forward.
Surrender is not a Ranger word. It's not an option. I know that I'm not going to be able to get to do this again. This is my chance.
It all starts at the legendary Ranger School, the crucible where these elite warriors are forged. It has been described as the longest approved gut check in the Army. Over 62 days, students will patrol hundreds of miles over mountains and through swamps under the crushing weight of their equipment. All the while, they are deprived of both food and sleep, forced to perform at the very edge of their physical limits. But it's not just the physical challenges that make Ranger School so intense. The mental strain will break these soldiers down to their core.
If I have a come-to-God moment, I have to take my PC off my patrol cap, and on the inside of that, my commander gave me a Ranger tab, the yellow and black one that you get during graduation, and I pinned it to the inside of my PC.
Ranger School is not for the faint of heart, but for those who are up to the challenge, it is the ultimate proving ground.
They already didn't have enough beds for the people in our company. And our eyes reminded us that we don't have enough beds because there's not going to be this many people by tomorrow. Just a slight reminder that there's too many of you anyways, and not all of you are going to pass.
Rangers, if you don't figure it out, you're about to get another casualty.
It's completely different than what people would think Ranger School is like, but you can't put that into words, so it's hard to tell somebody something that you have to experience for yourself.
They got a saying, it's called as the tab turns. So Ranger School is continuing to change and to develop, but at the end of the day, it is the same, right? They're always going to put you in scenarios that is going to test like your ability to actually make decisions on the ground.
As you go through Ranger School, it is a gut check. It's going to check you out. And what's going to get you through it is whether you have it or not. Thousands and thousands of soldiers train all their lives to come here, prepare themselves to come to Ranger School, and only a few hundred leave here every class with the tab. It's not for everyone.
I'm not going to leave until I get it, so just buckle down, stop complaining, and just get the job done.
You are watching Sky News as we continue our coverage of the huge military parade there taking place in Washington, D.C., marking the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. And coincidentally, also, it happens to be the 79th birthday of the President, Donald Trump. Let's bring in our U.S. correspondent, Mark Stone. And Mark, you've been watching these events unfold. How have things gone down there in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, very good evening from Washington. Just gone 8 o'clock in the evening here, and we're at the closing part of a long and huge military parade that has been taking place here through the course of the evening. We're into the musical element now. We heard from Donald Trump for the first time a few moments ago, taking part or presiding over a re-enlistment ceremony of soldiers who have decided to re-enlist in the military. That is what we saw a few moments ago. But, the focus, in fact, has been the juxtaposition of what's happening here and what's happening in Los Angeles, where police have clashed with protesters, tear gas has been fired. Los Angeles, of course, is the place where Donald Trump decided to deploy the National Guard, to federalize the National Guard and bring them in to help defend and help protect federal buildings holding people who have been rounded up in his immigration raids. That is one part of context. One part of the context. The other, of course, and you can see that split screen there, looking a bit calmer in Los Angeles now. I can tell you incidentally that there have been protests in other cities as well. The No Kings protests, they've been dubbed. Broader, not specifically against the immigration policies of the Trump government, but more broadly about the vibe that people have, that Donald Trump somehow sees himself as a king or as an emperor and wants to be almost dictatorial with his administration. Protests have been huge. 200,000 people joined the No Kings protests in New York City, according to organizers. 60,000 in San Diego attended 2 protests in the downtown area of that Californian city. All of that has been peaceful, not so in Los Angeles, where there were, as you saw a few moments ago, some clashes. And the other split screen, altogether much, much more serious, is with the Middle East, where over the course of the evening, while this parade has been taking place, we have seen the latest barrage of Iranian missiles raining down on Israeli cities, and the Israeli Iron Dome missile defense system has been kicking into action, shooting those missiles out of the skies. At the moment, we have no reports of any impacts of that in that latest barrage, but it is quite the juxtaposition as the US Army celebrates its 250th birthday here, over in Israel and in Iran, where the Israelis have been hitting back. An altogether different scene. I do wonder, Sam, if Donald Trump was not sitting watching this, he would be in the Situation Room, I'm sure, a few hundred meters behind him in the White House, in the West Wing, absorbing what's going on. And we had a shot a moment ago of Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. He's here too, but he wasn't looking at the parade. He was checking his phone, no doubt being updated on what's happening in the Middle East. But there, the other image from Los Angeles, where tear gas continues to be fired by police as they clash with protesters who have been surrounding that building there, which is one of the federal buildings where those people who've been rounded up, illegal aliens, as the Trump administration refers to them as, they've been rounded up and held awaiting deportation. So quite the evening here in Washington, in Los Angeles, in Tel Aviv, and in Tehran.
Mark, we will turn to the events in the Middle East because there have been developments there. Just briefly, while we're looking at these pictures of Los Angeles, it really highlights the divide in America, doesn't it? We're seeing this display of dominance there in D.C., that spectacle of strength that Donald Trump wants to portray. Meanwhile, there are all these clashes taking place in cities around the country. It really is a divided nation, even though there is bipartisan support for, of course, the military.
Yeah, and that's an important point. And actually, the people we've spoken to here have reacted with some, ranging from irritation to anger at the suggestion that this is an event that's somehow been hijacked by the president to celebrate his own birthday. They would see that as a US media-generated story. Of course, it's not just the country that is divided. It is the media as well. Very, very polarized media in this country. The people here who we spoke to were quite clear that they believe that this event in Washington is a celebration of the US Army and of the US military more generally. It is a celebration of patriotism. But they're, of course, all fully aware of what is a bitter divide around this country. There's been some debate about the time it has taken for those who are uneasy, to say the least, with Donald Trump and his second presidency, to actually rise up and protest. But this weekend, we've really seen that. As I say, it has been almost entirely peaceful, but large numbers in cities and towns across the country under the banner of No Kings, protesting against what they believe is a veering towards an authoritarian type leadership in this country. Deep concern among left-leaning citizens across the country about what's coming out of Washington. We haven't felt it here in this event itself, of course not. But more broadly, you do all the time feel that. It'll be really interesting to see how Donald Trump frames this moment when he speaks after this musical event that we're listening to now. How he frames the events in California, the protests more generally, and how he frames the really, really dangerous situation that is unfolding as we speak in the Middle East.
Well, speaking of that, I can bring you and our audience the very latest we're getting through via the Reuters news agency, who are quoting the Israeli military, saying that sirens have been activated in several areas following launches from Yemen and Iran. So Yemen and Iran have launched missiles towards Israel. That's according to the Israeli military. There are also local reports we're getting from media outlets and various Telegram groups that are reporting there have been direct hits in the Tel Aviv area. So direct hits are now being reported in Israeli media, multiple missile impacts after the latest round of Iranian strikes. And the military also saying that there have been launches now, Mark, from Yemen too. So this situation really escalating in the Middle East.
And escalating fast, I think. I wonder the extent to which Israel was prepared for the continuing barrages that are coming from Iran. Remember that over the course of the past 2 years or so, Israel has been engaged in a steady but sophisticated campaign to degrade Iran's military and its proxies around the region. We've seen how they have decapitated Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have done the same to a lesser extent with the Houthis in Yemen. They have done the same in Iran with in Iraq, with Iranian proxies there. We've seen how the Assad government in Syria has been overthrown internally, which has removed the Iranian proxies in that country. But Iran is proving tonight that it still has the capability, either directly or through its proxy in Yemen, to be able to put in place a sustained attack on the Israeli homeland, whether it be in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Jerusalem, or in other smaller cities as well. There was a city in the Galilee this afternoon that was hit very, very hard. A number of deaths there, injuries as well. This is spiraling really very quickly, and I would imagine that as soon as he's done with what he's listening to now, this rock concert on the Mall, Donald Trump will be heading into the Oval Office or to the Situation Room for an update on what is unfolding on the right of your screen.
And Mark, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the key pledges that Donald Trump vowed during the presidential campaign, and then when he won the election, was to put an end to wars, wasn't it? And he, was quoted as saying he would end the Ukraine conflict on day one. And this seems to be going in quite the opposite direction, certainly in the Middle East.
If you take a snapshot of his presidency right now, then it looks like a disaster. We have in Ukraine, the war is getting worse, not better. You have in the Middle East, the events of the past 36 hours. Peace through strength is his motto. Right now, it feels maybe like peace eventually through strength, but there will be some difficult times ahead. And then domestically, as you're seeing on the right of your screen there, huge challenges as well. As his hardline immigration policies, popular when he was on the campaign trail, his broad strategy to reduce illegal immigration was popular, alongside his views on the economy. Those were the two issues which propelled him back to the White House. But it is his methods now, where he is rounding up large numbers of people, illegal aliens as they referred to, specifically without judicial process, rounding them up into detention and then deporting them. That method has caused a significant degree of unease, which has turned into the protests that you're seeing there in Los Angeles.
And Mark, it is just moments away now before we are expecting the Vice President J.D. Vance to speak and introduce Donald Trump to the stage there. So while we stay with you ahead of that, we do know that there was a phone call between Donald Trump and President Putin of Russia earlier. Any more lines coming out of that?
Well, it was a long phone call. It was an hour or so long. We weren't expecting that it was going to take place today. There've been a flurry of phone calls, leader to leader, right around the world as the events in the Middle East unfolded. Donald Trump, his spokesperson, gave us a short statement about the phone call. It was 50 minutes long. President Putin called this morning, it says, very nicely to wish me, says Donald Trump, a happy birthday, but to more importantly to talk about Iran, a country he knows well. Of course, remember, Russia and Iran are closely aligned. Iran has provided quite a lot of weapons, drones mainly, to Russia for its war in Ukraine. It is Iranian drones that have been used to wreak havoc on Ukrainian cities over the course of the past couple of years. The statement from Donald Trump goes on to say, we talked at length, much less time was spent discussing Russia, Ukraine, but that will be for next week, says Donald Trump. He says Putin is doing the planned prisoner swaps. Large numbers of prisoners are being exchanged immediately from both sides. The call, says Donald Trump, lasted approximately 1 hour. Putin feels, as do I, that this war in Israel-Iran should end, to which I explained his war should end too. So powerful words. Let's listen to Vice President J.D. Vance.
State lines to be here today. This is your national capital. Welcome to Washington, D.C. We are thrilled to have you.
All right, sounds good.
This evening, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States Army, the oldest branch of the greatest fighting force ever known to man, I want to say to all the soldiers all across our nation's capital and all across the world, happy birthday, soldiers. We're proud of you. And I want to say you represent an unbroken line of greatness, of excellence. And one of the things the President of the United States has told his entire administration, from the Vice President on down, is that we must remember that the young men and women who put on the uniform and serve this nation are our most precious resource. We must honor them, we must respect them, we must fight for them, and that's exactly what the Trump administration aims to do every single day. And so to our soldiers, we're so proud of you, and let me tell you that the way that we honor and respect you is, number one, we never ask you to go to war unless you absolutely have to. And number two, when we do ask you to go to war, we give you the weapons and the support needed to kick the hell out of the enemy and come back home safely. Now, I know I am the last thing standing between June the 14th is, of course, the birthday of the Army. It is, of course, the birthday of the President of the United States. And happy birthday, Mr. President. But I would get in trouble if I didn't mention that it's also my wedding anniversary. And so to my lovely wife, I love you, honey. Happy anniversary. And thank you for everything that you do for our country. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the 45th and 47th Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, President Donald J. Trump.
Thank you to Vice President Vance, and thank you to our wonderful First Lady, and above all, thank you to the greatest fiercest, and bravest fighting force ever to stride the face of this earth, the United States Army. Thank you very much. Because the Army keeps us free, you make us strong, and tonight you have made all Americans very proud. They're watching from all over the world, actually. Made them all very proud. Every other country celebrates their victories. It's about time America did too. That's what we're doing tonight. And watching this magnificent display, our souls are filled with gratitude for every generation of warriors who have worn the uniform all the way back to the very beginning. So to every veteran across our land and right here in our nation's capital, including 6 recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor, we love you, we honor you, and we salute your noble service to our flag and to our country. As we celebrate tonight, we also think of the hundreds of thousands of Army soldiers who have made the supreme sacrifice for our nation and selflessly laid down their lives in every war, from the Revolution to the War on Terror. To the Gold Star families with us today, the courage of your heroes is the bedrock on which our entire nation stands. We thank you. Yes, we thank you. Today we commemorate an event that did not just change American history, but changed the history of the entire world. With the creation of America's Army on June 14th, 1775, liberty got its shield and the freedom got its sword. Those first Army patriots in the American Revolution fought against a fearsome enemy and impossible odds, but they were armed with a righteous cause. They were led by an indomitable commander, a truly great man, General George Washington, and they were united by an eternal creed. Their motto was victory or death. Over the past 2.5 centuries, our warriors have shown unrivaled valor on fields of battle around the globe. With the frostbitten feet and bloody fist, they have marched into the flames and fury of combat, charged up mountains, stormed beaches, waded through torrents of gunfire, and leapt into skies thick with smoke and shrapnel. The U.S. Army has driven bayonets into the heart of sinister empires, crushed the ambitions of evil tyrants. Beneath the threads of American tanks, it's done so well, it's done so much, and sent the devil himself flying into full retreat. Time and again, America's enemies have learned that if you threaten the American people, our soldiers are coming for you. Your defeat will be certain, your demise will be final, and your downfall will be total and complete. Because our soldiers never give up, never surrender, and never, ever quit. They fight, 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 and they win, win, win. And that's why no institution in history has entered more names into the roster of American heroes than the U.S. Army, the Congressional Medal of Honor, more than anyone or anything. There was Mad Anthony Wayne, asked by George Washington to lead a daring midnight raid up the cliffs of Stony Point with unloaded muskets and only their bayonets to fight the redcoats. Mad Anthony replied, "Issue the order, sir, and I will storm into hell for you." Then there was the Civil War general, John Corse, shot in the face in combat. He fired off a message to his commander: "I am short a cheekbone and one ear, but I am able to whip the hell out of all of them." He stayed on the front lines, it seemed forever. In World War II, there was the great Creighton Abrams, besieged on all sides by the Nazis at the Battle of the Bulge, he boldly proclaimed, "They've got us surrounded again, the poor bastards." This is the fighting spirit and unyielding force of the U.S. Army. It has never changed, and it will never, ever change, because there is no earthly force more powerful than the brave heart of a U.S. infantryman or an Army Ranger, paratrooper, or Green Beret. They are the best. They are the finest. From Bunker Hill to San Juan Hill, from Gettysburg to Guadalcanal, from Yorktown to Shiloh, and from the trenches of the Argonne to the mountains of Afghanistan, the Army has forged a legacy of unmatched courage, untold sacrifice, and unequaled and undying glory. Our soldiers have poured out their blood by the bucketful on Missionary Ridge and Heartbreak Ridge, on the sands of Sicily, Normandy, and the Philippines, and on the dusty streets of Da Nang, Baghdad, and Fallujah. Thanks to their extraordinary service and devotion, 250 years later, America stands tall, America stands proud, and America stands free. We're the hottest country in the world right now, and our country will soon be greater and stronger than ever before. Down through history, we've been blessed beyond words by this valiant legion of Army warriors and patriots, heroes and legends. And tonight we affirm with unwavering certainty that in the years ahead and in every generation hence, whenever duty calls and whatever danger comes, the American soldier will be there. No matter the risk, no matter the obstacles, our warriors will charge into battle. They will plunge into the crucible of fire, and they will seize the crown of victory, because the United States of America will always have the grace of Almighty God and the iron will of the United States Army. Congratulations to everybody. We love our country. We've never done better. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the Army, and God bless America. And now I'd like to ask our great First Lady to join me at the podium. Thank you very much, everybody.
Mr. President, on behalf of the United States Army, the Army Golden Knights, I would like to present to you this flag, which was flown over our nation's capital in free fall during the Army's 250th birthday celebration.
So that concludes Donald Trump's address there at that parade to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. He paid tribute to them, to the soldiers, saying that it was about time we celebrated our victories, that they fight, 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 and they win, win, win. As he concluded that, he was then presented with the American flag by one of the Golden Knights parachute team, which wrapped up that speech there. Let's bring in my guest here, Jason Pack from the Royal United Services Institute. You were listening in to that. Your thoughts to Donald Trump's address there?
It was quite the panegyric to the American Army. And of course, I understand this desire to be patriotic and to recapitulate some of the glorious moments of the U.S. Army, but we don't have a jingoistic tradition of having military parades where we recapitulate the glorious moments of the U.S. Army. So there's some kind of irony there. And he's also claiming to be a peacemaker in Ukraine and in Gaza, where the Middle East is now at war and the Ukraine-Russia conflict is hotter than it has ever been. So I just wonder if this will land as a lead balloon because of the split screen that Trump's remarks and then events in the world.
Well, that's what's so interesting. He didn't reference any of those. There was no reference to the domestic issues and the protests taking place, both in LA over the past few days and across the country now. But then also the escalating situation across the Middle East. What do you make of him really not addressing that at all?
He does understand some things about the American electorate, which is that the people who support him and support this parade, call it 43%. They don't care about that so much. They love this display of force, and they love that he told some funny stories about a guy with his face shot off still fighting. And there is a Trumpian charisma to it. Do you know what I mean? And you've got to give the devil his due, right? He does something for you, and it makes people laugh. It is a reality TV program. So, who cares about those Israelis and Iranians who are getting blown up? Do you know what I mean? We're Americans. And I think that he understands something about the 43% that he is playing to. However, if you're in that 57% for whom this is not attractive, the hypocrisy of the world being in the wars of global enduring disorder with missile fire and, being on the verge of World War III in the Middle East, and he doesn't mention it. Wow.
Is it a case of these are behind-the-scenes talks, though? We know Pete Hegseth is there at the event, as is Steve Witkoff. These are key individuals dealing with the fallout in the Middle East. Do you think this is more a behind-closed-doors situation that is being undertaken away from the public?
Of course. I would like to think that the American government, as low as we might have fallen, can still walk and chew bubblegum, that we can be doing diplomacy at the Deputy Assistant Secretary level with our allies Israel, and working with the Omanis, and trying to send signals to the Iranians, for example, please do restraint and all of that. And I'm sure that that's all happening. But you pointed out, isn't it interesting that he didn't even think it was necessary to say something to the American people? We stand in defense of our ally Israel, or we're lending, for example, more Arrow missiles or Patriot missiles to work with Iron Dome. He didn't feel any need to point that out, even at the point of talking about how the American military is meant to keep us and the world safe. So there was quite a tie-in for him to maybe say, oh, look, I'm doing this thing. But he just is very internally focused. And I think that that's critical. Looking at the U.S. from Europe, as we are, it's critical to point out that Trump is actually an isolationist, right? He's a chicken hawk in a way.
Well, Jason, for now, thank you. I want to bring in our correspondent, Mark Stone, who's there and was listening to it live there in Washington. And Mark, what really stood out to you?
Well, you were just hearing behind the voice of Jason was the voice of Lee Greenwood playing the song that has become kind of the theme tune to Donald Trump's campaign and then to his presidency. For me, that was the first moment tonight where you kind of got the sense that you could be at a Trump rally. It hasn't been like that over the course of the evening. And of all the people that we have spoken to, they said very clearly that for them this wasn't a political moment. Many of them were Trump supporters, some of them wearing the MAGA hats, but they hadn't come here to celebrate Donald Trump's birthday. They'd come here to celebrate the birthday of the US Army. And I suppose, in a way, Donald Trump's speech was a reflection of that, a reflection of what the audience had come for. Which is why he didn't veer off. I mean, there would have been many moments where he could, as Jason was just saying, have nodded to events in the Middle East. I wouldn't imagine he would mention anything that's going on in terms of the domestic protests, no. But events in the Middle East, backing up, supporting such a close ally in Israel, he could have mentioned that, but he chose not to in this moment. Remember, too, that there are 40,000 American soldiers at bases across the Middle East who are right now in a heightened degree of danger because of what's unfolding there. It was only a few hours ago that Iran said that it sees America as it being entirely complicit in what Israel is doing in terms of its bombing of Iran and its taking out of key leaders in the Iranian government. And so Iran said a few hours ago that it would target US air bases and British and French air bases and assets in the region. So right now, as we celebrate, as the American people here celebrate 250 years of the US Army, there are soldiers on active duty in the Middle East and right now facing a threat from Iran. That is something that Donald Trump is going to have to deal with in the hours and days ahead. He's going to have to address the issue. And as Jason and I were discussing earlier on, what Benjamin Netanyahu has started, only Donald Trump can finish. There will need to be an off-ramp, to use the Diplo jargon, to all of this. There will need to be a way out of it, a way to ratchet down the tensions, and that is going to have to involve the United States one way or another. So I wonder whether when he leaves here, as he will do very shortly, he will head straight to the West Wing, to the Situation Room for an update, because he certainly hasn't seen the pictures that we've been watching over the course of the evening, whether they be in California or, as I'm referring to, in Israel and in Iran as well. So very perilous times in the Middle East and extremely divided times here in the United States.
Yes, and that event there is going to culminate very shortly in a fireworks display, which we, of course, will bring to you. Mark, this was the first time we heard from him publicly since Israel launched that initial strike on Iran in the early hours of Friday morning. We've now had 3 nights of Iran and Israel exchanging airstrikes and that situation escalating. And as I mentioned, reports earlier from Israeli military that there had been multiple impacts in the Tel Aviv area. The IDF also has had some success of its own. The Tehran's oil ministry saying that there had been an explosion at the oil depot there and that had been hit by Israeli strikes. So both sides wanting to claim some success over the past 3 nights.
Yes, but I think the concern now is how long is this going to go on for, and is there going to be a mass casualty event in Israel? Because if that happens, well, that will only ratchet up the tensions. Israel will feel it needs to respond, and you can see how it spirals, how it gets worse and worse and worse. I think there has been a calculation in Israel that over the course of several years now, they've degraded Iran's capability, either directly from the Iranian homeland or through its proxies, to the extent that it could not mount a massive strike and a prolonged strike on Israel proper. But it appears, for now at least, to be doing just that. The Iron Dome missile defense system has its limits, and missiles do get through and have got through. So let's see how that unfolds. You can see here the events are ongoing. As you say, there's going to be a firework display a little bit later on. I'm going to make a prediction. I think by the morning there will be a row about crowd sizes. We've heard those before, but I reckon there'll be another one because Stephen Chung, who is the president's, the fireworks have just started now. Behind me, in fact, we'll spin the camera around and you can have a look. Stephen Chung, who is the communications director for the president, reckons that 250,000 people were here tonight. That was the estimate for how many people could turn up. But the authorities have said that the rather fewer have in fact turn up. Look, make your own mind up as to whether that's to do with the weather forecast or the president's popularity. Either way, have a look at the spectacle now as the fireworks begin to end this pretty unusual evening of patriotism here in the American capital.
Yes, let's soak up the atmosphere there as those events there culminate in this fireworks display.
When I raised my right hand, I swore an oath to every generation before me. I wear the same branch insignia as the soldiers who crossed the Delaware. Before there was a nation,
So you have been watching Sky News and our special coverage of the military parade there in Washington, marking the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. It does also happen to be the 79th birthday of the U.S. President Donald Trump. With me is Jason Pack from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Jason, let's sum this up. Your final thoughts on what has been a remarkable day, really, there in Washington?
I mean, as an American, I see it as cringe. This really isn't our political tradition, the way that the French have Bastille Day. But the fireworks in particular are a fascinating split screen because viewers may remember seeing the very similar play of light as Iron Dome and Arrow missiles are trying to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles. And an environmental tragedy is happening in Iran where a fuel depot in a elite Tehran suburb is literally on fire, right? And other refineries have now been hit as the conflict is escalating there to pieces of key infrastructure. One wonders what we are celebrating while watching this in DC right now.
And what have you made of the events throughout the day? America is not used to this kind of spectacle.
No, I think that Donald wanted to have his parade. He got his parade. But he wanted to have it in circumstances where he wasn't using the National Guard against his own citizens in LA and where his key ally was not under a much greater ballistic missile attack than they thought they would be as a response to their attack on Iranian nuclear sites. And as we've heard, it seems that the Israelis were not fully aware of the remaining capacities that the Iranians and Houthis would have, which is why there have been more civilian casualties in Israel in the last night than there had been in any of the October 2024 retaliation.
Jason, it's been great to have you here with us to talk us through and guide us through these events as we've watched this military parade take place in Washington, D.C. So thank you, Jason Pack there from RUSI. It's been great to have you on board. And do stay with us here on Sky News, because coming up, we will have more on the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, the very latest on that.